This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 226, White Collar Warrior, an interview with Bill Hart.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. And today we're going to do something that's a little bit self-serving for Pat. My son, Captain John Helmers, is in the process of attempting for the second time Ranger School in August. John is a recruiter and, for all practical purposes, a sales manager of a group of people who are trying to persuade, who are trying to sell the value of the Army. And he is really, really good at it. It is really fun to see him work a crowd. And I'm very excited that he's getting ready to do this extremely hard adventure of Ranger School. And through serendipity, Bill Hart, our guest today, reached out to me about 3-4 weeks ago, and he is the author of the book White Collar Warrior, Lessons for Sales Professionals from America's Military Elite. And I saw the two and I thought, oh man, this is a perfect match. And that's why we're having Bill come on here to talk about what Ranger School and Navy SEAL schools and all those things have to do with sales professionals. What a perfect match. So, with no further ado, let's get to the interview. Welcome, Bill. Are you ready to babble?
I am ready to babble.
Bill, you're the author of the book White Collar Warrior, Lessons for Sales Professionals from America's Military Elite. When you reached out to me, I thought, well, that's an interesting spin on the book.
Right? No doubt.
And it's especially interesting for me because my son, John Helmers, Captain John Helmers, he's a captain in the United States Army. He's a recruiter, and actually he has been through Ranger School once before and failed it. And next month, he's actually going to attempt it again. And
wow.
This is not an easy thing, Ranger School.
Oh, my goodness. No, not even close.
So I was looking at this and I'm going, oh, what's this got to do with sales? What's this got to do with business? And that's why I thought this is just a really great topic.
Cool. Well, I agree, man. I mean, this lit me up early on when I started to see the parallels. And I mean, it's unique. It's different. I think it's one that causes people to kind of cock their head like a German shepherd, right, when it hears a high-pitched sound. But I think once you spend a little time in this conversation, as we will today, I think it will become more clear to listeners.
And before we get into how this got to something to do with sales, let's put some context on what Ranger School is. In your book, you said you had a buddy of yours named Chad Fleming, and he is a former Army Ranger, right?
Correct.
And there's a great quote that he shared with you in this book, and I wonder if you could read it to us so we can get some sense of like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, man. It is, so it's more like a mini story, right? This is when I was asking Captain Chad Fleming about his experience in training. And he is I'm sure like your son, he's a big, strapping, no-nonsense, good-looking guy. And he lays this out for me. So let me just read it to you. He says, the physical training is tough and taxing on the mind and body. You learn more about yourself in your own breaking point than anything else. During physical training, you learn about how different people are affected when you throw stress at them. It took me 2 times to get through Ranger School. The first time, I had a full-blown heat stroke during the Ruck March. It's a fast march of 15 to 22 miles over rugged terrain with 50 to 60 pounds on your back. Can you imagine? Holy cow. He says, I was running on a little more than 3 hours of sleep. After I got healed up, they wouldn't let me back until winter class. When it was time for the Ruck March again, I was mentally dreading it. I thought, what if it happens again? At the 12 to 12 and a half mile mark, I had to really dig down deep. In Ranger School, you have a Ranger buddy, and mine said, I can tell you're sucking. You cannot let this get you. Right? Can you imagine that conversation? And he said, he wanted to take some of my gear. I'm a type A guy and decided, no, you're not taking my gear. I got it. It wasn't about letting myself down. It was about not letting the other guy down, the person to the left and they're right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly how they are.
Right?
Yeah. He said that it's not like he's going to learn a lot to be a better soldier because he's
Right.
an infantry guy and he's been in Afghanistan and all that jazz.
Yeah,
He says you learn about yourself.
totally.
So, what's this got to do with selling? What's this got to do with business?
Yeah, great. It's a great question, and it's a valid question because on the surface, it's like, yeah, I don't know how hard you're going to reach to try and make this bridge, but in order to answer that question, I'm going to just take you back a little bit, and that is that I never served our country in military. I'm one of the 99% that has not. My dad did during World War II. My brother-in-law did as a Navy pilot during the Vietnam War. And I've always sort of had this I don't know what to call it, just a yearning, I guess, for the military. I feel like I sort of just missed it. And I was at the tail end of the Vietnam War. It wasn't a very popular war. Nobody was really holding their hand up to go to that one. And I just missed it. I was at the tail end of it. So back in about, I'm going to call it 2008, I read the book Lone Survivor. Do you remember that book by Marcus Luttrell?
No.
So it's as the name implies, right? This isn't a spoiler alert. He was the lone survivor. You might remember it better as a Hollywood film with Mark Wahlberg as the star. Right?
That was in
Yep.
Afghanistan, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. I remember
And
that.
it's four SEALs, and
Yeah,
they
yeah,
come
yeah,
upon
yeah, 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 yeah,
this
yeah.
high value target in a village, and the goat herders show up, and they get found.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there's
yeah, 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 yeah.
so that book, long before it was a movie. When I read that book, Pat, it just hit something in me, man. I'm like you, I coach people. I think I've been doing this 15 years, something like 12,000 hours of coaching. And, I work with a lot of really successful people that are willing to pay me $1,000 an hour to be coached. And yet some of them, I've got to really work hard to get them to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I'm reading this book and it's like, holy cow, I cannot believe what they go through in training, let alone what can potentially happen in their deployment, right? So it was the SEAL community, not dissimilar at all from the Ranger community, that first brought me into it. I got involved with a charity called Boot Campaign because I felt like if I couldn't go back and change my life, and they're not going to let me enlist at 60. Talk to your son about that. I'm sure that wouldn't go over too well. Like, we'd love to have you, but we can't bring you in as a general, for the record. Yeah, like that doesn't work. So instead, I thought, you know what? I'm going to serve those that have served us. And so there was a charity that was forming in Texas at the same time that I was sort of going through all of this, by 5 women, read the same book, Lone Survivor, had a similar impact. And so Boot Campaign was formed. And so I got involved and started doing events with them and emceeing some events and doing some videos. And now I serve on their board of directors, and we're all about helping men and women coming home with traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress, and just doing whatever we can to help them be as highly functioning as we can possibly help them to become. So that's what got me into it. During that process, I started to meet some of these Rangers. Like when I met Chad Fleming, he was on stage at a fundraising event. If you go on to read the book, you'll find that he lost his leg in Afghanistan. It was an unbelievable,
Oh my
like
goodness.
12 hours from going home. There's an explosion in front of him. There's one behind him. His leg is a mess. He uses his belt as a tourniquet and his rifle as a crutch. And, it's an unbelievable story. He goes on to deploy 4 more times with one leg, if that gives you any idea as to who this guy is. And so I start listening to these guys, Pat, and I realize, as much as there's all of this mystique around the military and this aura around it's like cops on steroids, right? Cops have a certain sort of aura, right? Where you sort of walk around with your chest puffed up and you're not just going to smile real easily and readily. And, you've got to be in that position, right? As a peace officer. Well, it's even more so in the military. And yet once their guards started to come down, I started to see these individual, I won't say paths yet, but just individual attributes that I thought, as a sales guy, holy cow, there's a bridge there. And so that's where it all started for me. And I began to interview them. And that's where the idea came from for the book.
So what are these? What are these principles that you saw, or these reoccurring attributes that you
Yeah.
saw these people have that are aligned with sales. Let's walk through that list.
You bet. So in the book, there are actually 7 key areas that I focus on. And, I'd love to tell you that these all just like appeared one morning in a bulleted list, and that's not how it happened. It really took some time for me to look, consider, question. I dismissed some that like, I don't think that's a bridge. But like number 1 is training. I mean, think about what your son is going through right now, and just the fact that you get as a dad that it's not about the physicality. It is more about the mentality, right? It's much more about mindset. Over and over and over again, we begin to hear that story. And then I think as a coach and even as a sales guy, right? If I go back 30 years in my life and I think back to how I hate to even admit this, but I think it hopefully will endear me to listeners who get it. I would just wing it. I would just rely on my personality and my smile. Like, yeah, sure. This is what you should do because, it's a good thing. You should do this good thing that I'm telling you about. And the truth of the matter is the best in sales rehearse, right? They train. They know what the objections are that they might come up with. They know what their product offering is. Here's a classic example of this. I love this story because we hadn't purchased a new car actually ever. My wife and I don't think we've ever purchased a new car. We had not. We'd always bought used cars. We went out about 6 months ago and we went to, of all things, a Mazda dealer because this Mazda CX-5 was comparing favorably to the Lexus.
I'm a big Mazda fan.
Oh, dude, they are a great
I've owned like
vehicle.
4 of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh my
years.
goodness. Anyway, we get to the dealership and I'm going to just be completely honest and tell you that the guy that is walking the floor, that's going to be our obvious contact, is probably 73. And I think, I hate to say this, right? Because my bias is I think I want a younger guy to talk to or a woman. And so I start talking to him and I realized very quickly, holy Toledo, this guy knows this vehicle inside out. And as a matter of fact, after we bought the car, these days with all the technology, right, you got to spend another 30 minutes with somebody explaining Bluetooth and all the connectivity and what's going on in the car. He was the guy. He's like, okay, Bill, what I want you to do is turn on your phone, open up preferences. And it's like, what? Really? It's like my grandfather. And he's walking me through all the tech. So here's my point. My point is he had clearly spent a lot of time in training. So training is number 1. Does that make sense? And do you want me to go on or do you want to discuss number 1? You want me to just fly through all the key points?
Let's fly.
Okay. So training is number 1. Discipline is number 2. I won't detail it yet. Fear is number 3. Now, fear is very real in the military as it translates to sales. More often than not, it's call reluctance, right? And call reluctance, as we both know, if you've been around this game for a long time, it's more than just fear of picking up the phone. There's about 12 different kinds of call reluctance. I'm afraid to cross the bridge into my personal sphere because I feel like I'm going to lose relationships there. That's very different than I'm afraid to pick up the phone and make a cold call. So fear. Planning. Planning is enormous. In our world, it's business planning, right? Most salespeople don't business plan, and if they do, it's a perfunctory exercise to keep their boss off their back. Genuine business planning, the way that we approach it anyway in coaching, is meaningful. It's unique. It's completely customized to the individual. So planning. Failure. Nobody likes to talk about failure. It was one of my posts this morning on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram is that, you're going to fail. Like, expect it, right? Everybody expects it in the military. Of course we're going to fail.
Right? One of my favorite quotes is from the Yoda in The Last Jedi. It's like, failure, the greatest teacher is.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And failure is something you just have to expect. And yet in sales, I think some of us think that, well, I don't really talk about that and I don't want to focus on failure. I'm just going to focus on my successes. And it's like, okay, but guess what? You're going to lose a deal and that person is going to go with a less expensive option. And if you don't stand back from that and look at it and learn from it, you're actually not going to improve. So failure, motivation, huge conversation. I'm sure you've done lots of interviews with that topic, right? There's so much variance, I think, on how people view
we
that.
have to dig into the why we're even doing this.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. Yeah, and then the last one is team, and this one I really struggled with because I realized that, even people that are listening to this right now, Pat, there are people they would consider themselves to be lone wolves. It's like, you know what? It's up to me every day, and I don't have a team. And I make the argument in the book that even if that's true, and I've been that guy, you do have somebody, right? Whether it's a teenage kid that can address envelopes for you or a receptionist at the office that can help you with your database, there's somehow, some way, there's a way to bring team into your effort, even if it's just systematizing something and using technology. So anyway, those are the 7 topics.
We kind of skipped discipline.
Did I? Okay, let's go back.
And you said something like, well, we'll get to that one. Let's get to that one.
So let's go there. That to me is the most fascinating thing. Here's what I see as a coach. And again, this is me being super transparent. When I'm interviewing a new client for the first time, one of the first things that I'm really looking for is, where did this person learn discipline earlier in life? Right? The very thing that John, right? Is that your son's name?
Yep.
The very thing that John is learning right now, he's already learned in the Army. He's certain to learn as he moves into the Ranger environment, is discipline in an enormous way. And the cool thing is, it will serve him all through his life. It just will. It will in his fitness, in his next business, if he becomes a career officer, right? Whatever it is he does, it will serve him. So I always look for, where did you learn discipline? Because you know what, man? I didn't. As a kid, I grew up in an upper middle class lifestyle in Miami. It was comfortable. Nobody really held my feet to the fire scholastically or sports. And I'm telling you, man, I just kind of showed up and got gentlemen's B's and C's and got through life because I'm tall and have a nice smile. I'm completely honest with you right now. And yet what I learned is, I had to figure out discipline like at 30. That's not a good time to figure it out, right? So what's the difference, or why do we care? The thing about discipline is, it's going to push you through the things that need to be done every day, regardless of how you feel. If you wake up in the morning, Pat, you know this. We have all struggled with workouts and diets, right? But if you say, okay, this is it, summer's coming up. I don't want to be wearing a t-shirt at the beach. I am going to go work out. But you wake up, and in my case, in Southern California, it's like, 90 degrees. Wow, it's hot. I don't really want to do that today. Whatever, discipline is going to cause you to push through and do that anyway. If you're in sales and there's a certain number of calls that you need to make, or these days it could be video emails that you're going to send, or handwritten notes, or blog posts that you're going to put up, just in the very way, Pat, that you do this show. Here's what listeners wouldn't know. The machine that you have in place to create excellence repeatedly with this show, I've seen from our initial contact that we had before you were taken off for a few weeks. I've seen it in the email that you sent to me, preparing me for success so that I knew what to expect. You leave nothing to chance here, and I'm going to suggest that's discipline.
Discipline is, I think, really, really, really important. Because it's just easier. It's mentally less taxing.
True.
True. There's these things I got to do today. This is how I do it. This is the schedule I have. This is how I approach it. I don't have to think very hard on it. You just do it. And at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I got that done.
Exactly. So here's a great quote by Jocko Willink. It's in the book. Jocko is, if you don't know Jocko, just imagine that name for a minute. Like, how many Jockos do you know? I don't think there's a blue license plate at Disneyland with that name on it, right? Jocko. And this guy is a retired Navy SEAL officer. He was in charge of, I can't think of the name of the platoon, but the degree of badassery with this environment and this group was not to be believed in Ramadi. And, he's a jujitsu guy. His neck is the size of one of my thighs. He's exactly what you would think. And he wrote this book with his partner, Leif Babin, who also deployed with him, called Extreme Ownership. And in the book, he says, discipline equals freedom.
Yeah.
Now, right? But here's the thing. You get it because you just, based on your reaction, you totally get it. But a lot of people hear that and they go, hang on, what are you even saying to me? I'm in sales because I want freedom. I want the flexibility to come and go as I want, kind of create my own hours, right? His contention is, but watch this. Discipline actually creates that freedom for you. And his point is, if I'm disciplined in my finances, I have the freedom to make choices and take trips and do the things that I want to, invest where I want to, take advantage of opportunities when they come up. If I'm disciplined in my fitness, I have the freedom to do the things that I want to enjoy. If I want to go to Hawaii on vacation, I can hop into a kayak and, go all around or climb Machu Picchu because I've taken great care of myself. Discipline equals freedom.
I love it. I love it, Bill.
Yeah,
well,
man.
Bill, how can people find this book?
Yeah.
I know it's on Amazon. I see it right here. Right?
It is on Amazon, and it is available at Barnes and Noble, and a site that I would drive you to once you buy the book for a bunch of free stuff. We've got a leader's guide. There's a reader's guide, a summary. There's a bunch of video interviews that I did with these guys as sort of value added content that you can only find at the site, and it's www.whitecollarwarriorbook.com. So whitecollarwarriorbook.com. It'll just ask you for your name, address, email, and then you just need the little, whatever the sales number is you got from either Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and then all that content is yours.
That's terrific. And I'll make sure and place that link in the show notes so people are driving right now, they don't have to try to write that down or re-listen to it. I'll have it there for them.
Cool.
This has been fun, Bill.
Well, I've enjoyed it, Pat. You make it enjoyable, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's like my favorite topic. So
I'm glad you wrote this book. I really am. This is a great book.
Thanks,
I'm really
man.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Well, I appreciate it. And look, do me a favor, and I really mean this. Like, tell John that I appreciate his service. No, I mean it. I get it. I get what this looks like, and it's easy to, put on a dress uniform as a recruiter and look good, and everybody sort of sees it a certain way. But the truth of the matter is, that guy, if he's going back through Ranger school, he wants to be back in the action, and I get it. And I want you to please tell him from somebody that you connected with that I appreciate his service, and I appreciate you guys, the parents, raising such a man who would be willing to do that and be part of the 1%.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. You're very welcome.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
After the interview, Bill and I probably chatted for another 30 minutes about various topics, and I so enjoyed having him visit us on the podcast. Just to kind of walk through his list once again, these are the characteristics that he found in the interviews with the military elite. And the first one, again, was training. The second was discipline, fear, planning, failure, motivation, and team. Picture if you had a strategy every week that you were going to work on these, and you had some kind of SMART goals associated with them, something you could actually, a metric that you could use to measure that you had actually completed that, and that you integrated this into your life. We talked a lot about discipline. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, because as I said in the interview, it's less mental stress if you just have a list of things you're supposed to walk through every day. And then at the end of the day, you're kind of done. You don't have to think too hard about that. Winging it is actually more stressful. So I hope you got a lot of value out of this. And if you want to find the links that Bill mentioned in the interview, you can go to the show notes at www.salesbabble.com/226. A couple days ago, I was chatting with some people at the Aurora University meetup for sales professionals, and we were talking about the podcast, and the guy pulled up iTunes, and I didn't really notice this, but I'm like number 10 on the list, which is amazing given all of the business podcasts that are out there. I can't believe I got that high. That comes from you all. The downloading and listening to this, hey, I really appreciate it. So I have one request for you today. If you could do this, it would mean a lot to me. If you could go, if you're on an iPhone, if you could go into your podcast app or iTunes and give me a 5-star review or a 4-star review or an honest review. I don't want you to lie. If you could say something nice about the podcast, that would mean all the world. It actually helped bump me up. Other podcast tools also have things like Stitcher and whatnot. They also have a rating thing. If you're on an Android and if you could do this in whatever app that you're using to listen to the podcast, that would mean all the world. So that's all I got for today. Thanks again for visiting. I really, really appreciate it. Take care and have a highly successful and profitable week.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.